This is Lecker. I'm Lucy Dearlove. This month, oranges and lemons.
An example is that, or a couple of other traditional things that we have. And one is a lahmacun, which is a thin flatbread topped with spiced lamb mince, and then you have it with a salad and squeeze a lemon, always.
It's a sunny Monday lunchtime in January, and I'm sitting at a table in Selin Kazim's Shoreditch restaurant, Oklava. Oklava is broadly a restaurant with Turkish influence, although Selin, who's British Cypriot, would prefer not to be pigeonholed as such.
I always say if I didn't have to be labelled, I'd prefer that. I just want it to be a great restaurant. I want to just be seen as a chef who cooks good food.
The restaurant isn't open, but there are chefs bustling away behind the counter getting ready for service that evening. And while Selin and I are talking, she has half an eye on proceedings, profusely apologising before getting up to talk the chefs through something or pull a dish out of the oven.
When people ask me what my favourite dish is, like on the menu and stuff, or in general probably in life, I always say I probably couldn't pick one, but if I had to, it would probably be the lahmacun, because it's got, crispy bread, it's got lamb, which I love, and it's got acid. Then the salad, I love salad, and it's like everything. It's like a perfect mouthful, right? So I could eat those all day, every day. The question I ask myself is, what makes a really great plate of food? What makes it so delicious that you can't help but keep going back to it? And in my head, when I think about the dishes that I really love and the things that I'm like, I can't get enough of that suit my taste buds, the three fundamental things are acid, texture and contrast.
This holy trinity is the subtitle of Selin's latest book, 3. Acid, texture and contrast.
I think the most basic one is bringing acid with rich things. So if you think any sort of fat, butter, creaminess, things like that, for me, and I think for most chefs as well, and kind of more advanced cooks, it's ingrained in you to think that needs acid, but a home cook won't necessarily think of that. So that's a part of the trying to teach people that at the beginning of the book is this is what's happening in your head and in your mouth and why you think. And I think acid, it gives it that, when you put that in, it almost makes your mouth water and makes you keep going back for more.
And while acid in Selin's cooking comes from all sorts of varied and maybe even surprising sources, samphire, tomatoes, sauerkraut, she has a special place in her heart and her kitchen for the lemon. This is my inheritance. Lemon is an unmissable part of the Cypriot meal, she writes.
I love acid, probably too much sometimes, but I think that stems from my mother's love of lemons in particular, and I think that stems from the fact that she's was born and brought up in Cyprus, and that's it's quite a Cypriot thing, but with kebabs, which a lot of the time families getting together, especially in the summer months, but kind of all year round. Get round on a Sunday and they'll have big spreads and whatever, and there's always lemon wedges on the table, and so you see it here as well with Cypriots. I noticed it's not so much a thing from Turkey. I've noticed is quite different, but it's a very Cypriot thing to have the lemon wedges, and you squeeze it on whether it's your lamb shish or lovely grilled kind of fatty sausages and things.
Like the wedges of lemon served to squeeze over the delicious kebabs, citrus moves constantly and quietly through the veins of this country. Not entirely uncelebrated. Apparently our favourite cake as a nation is lemon drizzle. But it's rarely the main attraction, instead a supporting actor. Not just a friend to meat, it's found on the side of battered fish and raw shellfish alike, whether in polystyrene or silver platters. For the real elite citrus experience, you can find it dressed in a muslin jacket to shelter those among us who would never pick out their own pips. You can buy all manner of contraptions to extract the juice from it. It's neatly sliced into jewel-like wedges and stashed in perspex containers behind bars, ready for action. A glass of ice ready for gin and tonic or soda water looks naked without it. It's the title of one of our most famous nursery rhymes.
People may not necessarily realise it, but I think that really fresh acid that comes from lemon, I think excites people's palates and they don't realise what it's doing to them, but perhaps it's like hypnotising them and making them want more and more of it.
I don't think Celine is exaggerating. I think we are hypnotised by it. To me, the flavour of citrus feels irreplaceable in the exact opposite to the way that many fruits and vegetables feel interchangeable. The first time I really started to think about citrus was a few years ago, when I went to a talk on sustainability in restaurants with the chef Marie Mitchell. Someone who worked in the sustainable drinks field talked about how their bar, which operated with a closed-loop approach, was at odds with how many cocktail bars function, in two areas in particular: ice and fresh fruit. He talked about how, instead of turning to citrus as the go-to sour element in many of their drinks, they experimented with sour ingredients which could be grown easily in this country and then juiced or otherwise processed and preserved to reduce waste, like rhubarb. I guess appropriately for a closed-loop philosophy, there's an unexpected, slightly pleasing circularity here. In Dorothy Hartley's Food in England, she notes that before citrus was widely available, sour notes in English food were delivered by verjuice, produced from native crab apples, or barberries, or gooseberries, which weren't native but arrived in England in the 1530s and grew abundantly here. It was only in the 19th century, she said, when a squeeze of lemon fully replaced verjuice in many dishes. For some reason, I held a misconception for years that our citrus consumption in this country was a very modern addiction, like avocados or even bananas. And it's true that they are now more widely and cheaply available than at any other point in history. But the English obsession with citrus fruit goes back a lot further than you might think. Just as Celine describes how citrus perfectly cuts through fatty meat, English cooking from the 1600s onwards was pairing lemon when available with dishes like hen of the wake, boiling fowl, ragout of pig's ears and jugged hare. Margaret Visser, in her book Much Depends on Dinner, describes how first citrus sweets called sucade arrived in England from Spain and Portugal not long after the Crusaders had first tasted the fruit in the Holy Land at the end of the 12th century. And a century after that, the fruit itself was also to be found being transported northwards. As Kate Cahoon discusses in her book Taste, by 1534 Henry VIII's household was using enough citrus in its cooking to warrant buying an orange strainer. This could be attributed, perhaps, to his first wife Catherine of Aragon's background. The use of sour Seville orange juice in red meat stews and pies, and pairing fish and poultry with lemons. But the Elizabethan era saw a rise in cookbooks printed for householders, not professional cooks, and it was clear from these that citrus had firmly entered the consciousness of English cookery. Greater quantities were imported during this era, and prices started to decrease slightly. The historian Dr. John Gallagher points me in the direction of Giacomo Castelvetro, who he describes as a 16th century Italian refugee who spent a significant amount of time in England. Castelvetro's book, The Fruits, Herbs and Vegetables of Italy, which was reissued in the late 80s with a foreword from Jane Grigson, was written as a reaction to his horror about how few vegetables English people ate. Hoping to encourage the English to consume and grow more fruits and vegetables, in the book he lists seasonal varieties from Italy, along with preparation and cooking suggestions. Many of them include a dressing made from salt and pepper, olive oil, and bitter orange juice. I wonder how he would have felt about bitter oranges being absorbed into the historical canon of English food, but not primarily as a dressing for homegrown seasonal vegetables. As Helena Attlee recounts the story in her beautiful book about citrus cultivation in Italy, The Land Where Lemons Grow, at the beginning of the 18th century, stormy weather forced a Spanish ship laden with Sevilles to take shelter in the harbour at Dundee. James Keeler, a local grocer, bought the cargo at a very low price, only to discover that the oranges were sour, not sweet, and he was unable to sell them whole. His mother Janet had the idea of substituting oranges for the quinces she usually used to make marmalade, because traditionally, marmalade was made with quinces. The orange marmalade proved so popular with customers of their shop that Janet began to make it every year, and by 1797 the demand was so great that the family opened a marmalade factory in Dundee. The word zest, which we now interchangeably use in English as a noun or verb referring to the outer fragrant skin of the citrus and removing it respectively, and also as a descriptor of someone's enthusiasm for life, has been in usage since 1670s France. First used to refer to skin or peel generally, and then later more specifically to the skin of citrus fruits, which could add flavour. As early as the 1790s, an understanding of keen enjoyment was attributed to its meaning.
But I think I find lemon, and all citrus actually, but they're such interesting fruits because the juice is so different from the zest, I find. And I actually I use lemon zest in some things, but rarely, because I find it too dominating sometimes in certain things. And I think I think there's a real subtlety to how you need to use it.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
There is, right? Because especially in things, and with a lemon tart, right? Some people they're absolute avid bow down to the lemon tart kind of thing. And there's very few that I've ever had that I'm like, oh, that's really delicious and I can finish it. But otherwise I just find it, which is strange because I love lemons, but then I'm like, this, with that amount of sugar and stuff that goes into it, I don't know, it just does something weird with my palate that makes me go, oh, I don't know, I can't eat too much of that. And so often here, I don't know, there's been a dressing or something that we make and I'll be like, oh, I'll put, squeeze 1 or 2 lemons into it, and they'll be like, zest too? Almost every time, every chef would say to me, zest too? And I'd be like, no. And they're always like, why? And I'm like, they're like, it's gonna make it more lemony. And I'm like, yeah, but in the wrong way. There's a difference.
Wrong kind of lemony.
Wrong kind of lemony, yeah.
So I wanted to write about peeling and about skin. I always do find myself writing about food, even if the overall project isn't necessarily food focused.
Nina Minga Powers is a writer, editor and publisher who was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, partly grew up in China and now lives in London. Her book Small Bodies of Water was published last year. It's a lyrical, atmospheric collection of essays which see Nina submerged in different bodies of water all around the world, exploring themes of movement, migration and transformation.
Small Bodies of Water is mostly about swimming and water and migration, but I couldn't help but think about fruit, I think, and the connections that fruit brings me in particular. I think I really associate mandarins with my mum. I don't really know anyone else who eats as many mandarins as I do except my mum.
So tell me about your relationship with citrus.
So I'm obsessed with fruit, and I can if my body could, I could probably almost survive on fruit if my body would let me. And I think particularly at this time of year, I'm living off mandarins specifically. And I think I always have. So I grew up in New Zealand, and in winter time, so kind of June, July, those like mandarins are in such abundance. And then I think as I got older, I became more aware of mandarins and also pomelo being like really, really culturally significant, especially at New Year's, Chinese New Year time. And like when you visit a temple, or if you see like a family shrine at home, there's usually like a bowl of mandarins. And I didn't grow up with that element of like the spiritual element of Chinese culture really at all. But they kind of generally, they symbolize good fortune, prosperity, particularly at New Year. And then also they're like offerings that you would give. So I really like that as well.
And so now that you're living in London,
Yeah.
which is a city where you're not from, like you didn't grow up, do you feel like there's does it make you homesick, or is there a kind of like, do you eat them to be comforted and reminded of home?
Yeah, definitely. I think I do. I think it's taken a while for me to find like my favourite London mandarins, but I think I find them at corner shops, especially like Spanish clementines, and they usually have the leaves attached. Oh my gosh.
We've just come across like crates of pomelo.
At this point, Nina and I had just rounded the corner from Lisle Street into Gerrard Street, the main bit of London's Chinatown. It was late January, right before Lunar New Year, and the streets were packed with people, lanterns, and piles of citrus in crates. Nina suggested this location for our conversation, and it felt wildly appropriate for two reasons. The first being, of course, that citrus fruit came from China in the first place. As John McPhee notes in his book Oranges, the first known reference to this fruit occurs in the second book of the Five Classics, which appeared in China around 500 BC, and is generally regarded as having been edited by Confucius. He describes the fruit's journey over many thousands of miles and years, from its origins near the South China Sea, down into the Malay archipelago, and then on 4,000 miles of ocean current to the east coast of Africa, along the desert by caravan, and into the Mediterranean basin, and then over the Atlantic to the American continents. It sometimes exactly kept pace with the major journeys of civilization, he writes. While there are now many hundreds of varieties of fruit, there are 3 ancestral species in the genus Citrus associated with modern citrus cultivars: mandarin orange, pomelo, and citron. All are still familiar to us by these names today. I have only ever once eaten citron, at a supper club by the chef and writer Tom Eagle, where it was served thinly sliced and salted, and where another guest delightfully referred to it as a fatty lemon on account of its thick white rind. I must have eaten thousands of mandarin oranges over the years, despite the fact that, as Helena Attlee notes, they were the last member of the citrus genus to reach Europe. And this is going to be my first time eating a pomelo.
So these ones say red pomelo.
Is that the same as honey?
Well, these ones obviously will be pink inside. Maybe the honey ones will not be pink inside. I'm not sure. I think we should buy a red one then.
Okay, yeah, pink flesh.
Pink class 1. I think, should we get one of these?
Yeah.
I'm kind of squeezing it, but I don't really know what I'm looking for.
It's kind of hard because it's so like wrapped in plastic as well, because you've got the kind of layer of plastic. And
I like that this one's not giant. Some of them are really giant.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get one of these as well.
Yeah. So that's pretty good price for a pomelo, I would say, in London.
Okay.
This one for the customers, yeah. Just hang out.
Because we go around.
Okay, cool.
In Small Bodies of Water, Nina describes buying honey pomelos from a fruit shop while she was a student in Shanghai.
Should we get any mandarins as well?
Oh yeah.
We you get like
A little bag.
The man in the shop expertly cuts the skin and the pith away from the flesh, and the fruit skin rips noisily away from the membrane.
Are they?
Yeah,
They look good.
It's a violent, tender process, Nina writes. As such, we decide not to eat our pomelos there and then, saving them for later when we both have access to a sharp knife and somewhere we can make a mess.
Cashier number 4, please.
Do you want to put one in your bag? And
Yeah.
I can get this one. Okay. Should we go and eat a mandarin?
Yeah, definitely. I personally would just like, when I get home, I'll probably sort of take the peel off by like making a cut and then just ripping the skin off with my hands, because it does, I think if it's ripe enough it will just come away. It's very satisfying. And then like it's got these massive segments and I'll just kind of with my hands I'll just pull them apart, but then maybe put like a quarter of the pomelo in like a little bowl and just eat it with my hands. But you do end up probably like sucking some of the vesicles. I think that's what like
Great
the
words.
inside of the fruitiest bit,
Okay.
the flesh. I guess maybe I think the individual, because
Yeah. They're like little pellets.
exactly.
They're called vesicles.
vesicles. Yeah,
That's
I think so.
amazing.
It might be like a medical word as well.
Yeah, I can imagine like a blood
It's like a vessel.
or something. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
They're very like in a pomelo. They're very solid.
Pronounced.
There's not
okay.
this like juice happening.
Because I feel like in a bad orange, they're often pronounced 'cause
Yeah,
they're quite dry.
Dry. Yeah.
But
So
that,
pomelos, actually, when you open it, it might seem like it's going to be dry, but then when you bite into a chunk of vesicles,
it's not very appealing. Word, is it? It's a good word.
then it'll be really juicy.
Okay, it's just that they've got a lot of like
Yeah.
structural integrity.
Yeah, but I actually don't really know how other people eat pomelo. It's not a thing that I've really eaten like
With other
communally. I would always kind of do what we just did, like buy one at a shop and then take it home and eat it on my own. And that's what I still do. But I did read that the skin, I think, is sometimes used, like in Cantonese cooking, they will like cook it, like braise it,
Oh,
which is really interesting. Not so much the flesh, but I feel like surely also the flesh might be used. But I've never had it in like
and
a savoury
would
dish.
Would you eat the skin?
I
Or would it
personally wouldn't. no.
Yeah, because I feel like if you're going to braise that, it's still.
Yeah,
gonna
I don't
be-
know.
I guess it would just give a lot of flavour to
I
the
feel
dish.
so. I read quite often when I'm like searching for like customs about Chinese festivals or something. I find myself on these really annoying websites. They're like ChinaTravelGuide.com, and they're like quite badly written, and they're like aimed at, I'm guessing, like tourists or people who want to like live in China or something. But these are the ones that come up when you like like they're the top like Google hits. So I'm very often like trying to corroborate these really annoying website pages
Yeah.
that will have like symbolism of Chinese fruits or
Yeah.
something.
And you're trying to like read between the lines of like
Exactly,
yeah.
and like read deeper and figure out some context, like, because it's not written. I guess I'm kind of guessing it's written for not someone like me.
Yeah, it is like a tourist thing, so it's
Yeah.
quite a base level
But
understanding.
that is where I end up quite often finding answers to these questions. But it was on a website like that where I read something about pomelo being cooked.
Okay,
Like parts of pomelo being cooked,
Okay.
particularly for good luck around Chinese New Year. So I don't know if that's true, but according to travel website, potentially it's true.
The second reason why it's appropriate for Nina and I to be walking the streets of central London looking for citrus is that there's a historical precedent for this too. The things I read about the history of citrus in royal courts of the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries made it seem like it was reserved mostly for the elite, even when the prices did start to decrease. But the historian Dr. Charlie Taverner, whose work centres around street food, particularly during the 17th and 18th centuries, sets me straight. Citrus was sold by street sellers in London in numbers that are mind-boggling to me. In 1662 to 63, almost 750,000 oranges and lemons were shipped in from Spain and 2.5 million from Portugal. By the end of the 17th century, those figures had risen to 4 million and 7 million, respectively. Charlie's thesis, Selling Food in the Streets, also explains potential misconceptions about how much citrus was being consumed and by whom. He describes how, in the 1630s, the author James Hart suggested that oranges were mostly cooking ingredients. Hart liked sour varieties, but found sweet ones had no purpose. However, as Charlie continues, this is not how oranges come across in evidence of street vending. Across London, they were sold from barrows and in playhouses as sweet snacks. The taste for sweeter oranges may have developed over the 17th century as greater volumes arrived. In 1700, he writes, John Houghton, an apothecary and writer, estimated that London consumed 1/4 of all oranges shipped into England. Citrus fruit were carried in the eye of all about the streets, where they were very much consumed by ordinary people. Perhaps how fruit was bought, he writes, often as small street-side parcels, explains why this has been concealed. I've found that there's a sort of mythology about the history of citrus in London. The discovery of vitamin C as a scurvy cure and the subsequent adoption of first lemon and then limes as an integral part of the British Navy's victuals is well documented. Several sources cite this as a reason for the naming of Limehouse, the point on the Thames where cargo was unloaded from ocean-going ships and set on its way on the London Canal system. But other sources I read debunk this, describing the lime kilns built there as the actual reason. The nursery rhyme Oranges and Lemons is said to have originated as a result of the location of St Clement's Danes Church on the Strand, where citrus was apparently first unloaded. But Dr. Charlie Taverner's work describes Billingsgate, the old site near London Bridge, not the newer market, which lies much further east than St Clement's, as the main arrival site for imported fruit. One of the fundamental questions I wanted but felt unable to answer while making this episode was why we, people living in a country with a climate that can't meaningfully sustain citrus cultivation at the scale we'd need, are so obsessed with lemons, oranges, limes, grapefruits, and many other citrus fruits. It feels so ingrained in our food, our culture, our art even. And I can't help feeling that there's something about living in a dark, cold country that leads us to dream of bright yellow, orange, and green. Do you know the land where lemons grow is actually a translated line from Goethe's poem Mignon. It continues, in darkened leaves the gold oranges glow, a soft wind blows from the pure blue sky. Helena Attlee also wrote about the other travellers from Northern Europe who have been historically thrilled by the sight of Italian citrus trees, Hans Christian Andersen and D.H. Lawrence to name but two. You think there would be less surprise from Northern Europeans nowadays, but I can vouch for my own excessive excitement when a holiday let in Cyprus turned out to have its own lemon tree ready for picking. In Small Bodies of Water, the essay Unpeel reflects on the outer and inner layers of fruit, but also ourselves.
I think also of peeling fruit as a very, like a symbol of affection, which I think is really common across some different cultures, like not just Chinese or East Asian, but yeah, fruit is very often given as a gift, which is really lovely. I noticed that when I lived in Shanghai. fruit would often be given as a gift, particularly at the New Year. Yeah, I wanted to write about the skin of the fruit and the act of peeling and the symbolism around that and the memories.
Yeah, it feels like there's so much care inherent in that act because it's like quite a painstaking thing. And like,
exactly.
And you write in the chapter Unpeel about like peeling the pith off segments for a friend. Like, you know, it's just it's so painstaking and like there's so much effort that goes into it. Like, it's a really beautiful gesture of affection.
That particular type of mandarin that I think reminds me of being a teenager. Like in midwinter, they'd be quite small and you'd be able to peel them really easily. So when you'd pick them up, they'd be cold and you could feel like if you squish them, not too hard, but then you could kind of feel a gap between the actual fruit and the skin. So you could get your thumb under it really easily. And so we'd eat those like at morning tea at school. And I had a friend who like wouldn't want to eat the little white strands. I guess when you're a teenager, you have these weird things. And I remember like removing those and we'd like share a mandarin, which is very sweet now.
It's very sweet. Obviously, Small Bodies of Water is in part about swimming and being in water. Do you think, in a sense, a citrus fruit is a small body of water?
Yes, and you've reminded me that I think I wasn't thinking that at first, but then it makes so much sense because they actually are.
Because they're contained, and like unlike another piece of fruit, they're just water. Yeah. Okay, I'm so pleased you said that because I was like, am I reaching?
And I really wanted, if like I didn't know how it would work, but I was hoping that there could be like a pomelo or a citrus on the cover because it's like that's a small body of water. It's fine though. I really love how the cover came.
The cover does look great.
It's okay, but next book maybe should have like an orange on the cover.
Yes.
Or something.
I think,
But they did end up doing beautiful little illustrations, and the illustrator drew a pomelo, which is really lovely. So there is a pomelo. But yes, exactly.
Yeah, because it is like there isn't really any other fruit. And it's because you were talking about like the containment of it, and it does like. There is something fleshy, particularly about them. I guess lots of fruit have that, but the softness, the way there's like different layers of skin, and the texture of like orange and mandarin skin is sometimes a bit reminiscent of our skin. Yeah.
It's a bit gross, but
I mean, like even just the look of it, like it's almost got pores.
Yeah.
Like
so this is a bit weird, but it's just reminded me. So I'm allergic to nuts, so I carry an EpiPen. And when I was a kid, I remember like me and my mum and dad practicing on oranges. The EpiPen.
Yeah, that's what they tell you to do. Oh my god! Yeah, because it's the closest thing, like texturally.
I guess they could be quite. Like, the skin could be quite hard and thicker, but like but it's like your thigh.
Yeah. Oh my god! And because it is, you're like entering like a barrier, and then there's like something wet. No, that's weird.
Muscular.
But it's sort of the same like makeup. Yeah. Yeah, we have more in common with them than we think.
Later that evening, when we're both at home, Nina sends me a photo of her eating the fruit. My pomelo is so red, she says. I can't resist cutting into mine straight away too, ripping the skin and the thick pith away from the flesh. As Nina described, the vesicles are large and distinct. And she's right, it does somehow look dry. But as soon as I bite into a segment, it's the juiciest, most delicious fruit. This episode of Lecker was written, produced and hosted by me, Lucy Dearlove. Thanks so much to Selin and Nina for being a part of this episode. 3, Acid Texture Contrast by Selin Kiazim, and Small Bodies of Water by Nina Minga-Powells are both out now. And thanks also to the long list of writers and academics whose work contributed to this exploration of citrus. I've listed a full bibliography on the Lecker website because it's a fascinating topic and there's so many directions I could have gone. There's so many great details I missed out because I just didn't have space. I read so many brilliant books and articles while making this episode, so I really invite you to check them out as well. If you would like to support Lecker, you can donate to the Patreon at patreon.com/Lecker podcast. There are now monthly free newsletters for Patreon followers and monthly bonus podcast episodes for paid Patreon subscribers. Other ways you can support Lecker: rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, buy merch from the Lecker Big Cartel site, and tell your friends. Ben McDonald creates original illustrations for every episode of Lecker, and they're beautiful. You can see those on Instagram and Twitter at Lecker Podcast. I'm also posting sporadically on TikTok with the same handle. I'm quite scared of TikTok, so come and join me. Music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'll be back in your podcast feeds next month. Thanks for listening.